good evening or good morning, depending on where you are joining from. My name is Sophie Quinlan, and Kayla Hollingsworth and I will be your Zoom moderators, chaired by Advocate Wendy Miles and Advocate Alice Garton. It goes without saying that we are in excellent hands for this session today. Advocate Wendy Miles is a leading practitioner and leader in the field of international arbitration and dispute resolution. With over 25 years experience in arbitration, Advocate Miles is a critical addition to today's session. In the field of climate change and finance, Advocate Miles acts as a global coordinating council to various major corporates in relation to climate change transition, disclosure, reporting, compliance, and investment. She regularly advises investors and states in respect of climate-related physical transition and litigation risks. She works closely with a number of states in relation to climate transition regulatory structures to mobilize finance and formulate climate investment policy. Advocate Alice Garton is also an esteemed practitioner. She's the legal director for the Foundation for International Law for the Environment, and she has substantial expertise using advocacy, legal action, and litigation to accelerate government policies and corporate investment strategies that are consistent with the net zero emissions future. In addition to her role at the Foundation for International Law for the Environment, Alice is also a non-executive director for the Influence Map. It is an honor to welcome you to this fascinating session, and it is with immense pleasure that I hand you over to our chairs.
Sophie, thank you so very much. And Kayla, thank you to you too. And thank you everybody for hanging in there for this final session of the day. And also Apurva, thank you. And Linda, all the team. And thank you for the audience for hanging in to this point in the day. I want to start by just giving my co-chair a moment, and you'll see we're together in this very beautiful library in Scotland. And this is Alice Garton, a director from FILE Foundation, a Foundation for International Law for the Environment. May be known to some of you, will soon be known to all of you and not forgotten. So Alice, can you just sort of give us a quick intro to what you think this group, a lot of students, but a lot of practitioners as well, what you think they need to be thinking about in relation to commercial law and commercial lawyers from your perspective, a very much public interest focus?
Sure. Should I just give a bit of background about FILE first? So we're a specialist legal foundation set up about 2 years ago to scale action on climate change through the law, power of the law. We now have over 280 cases in nearly 50 countries ongoing, and we sort of look at the legal action under 3 different categories: systemic legal action, so cases against governments, so ratchet up ambition, shifting climate finance throws, so looking at things like risk disclosures of companies, their fiduciary duties of pension funds and how they manage risk. And then we also support lawyers who bring in the project level interventions, so challenging environment planning processes around particular projects. And then the most important thing about FILE is actually our role as a field builder, so really supporting public interest lawyers globally to bring in these sorts of cases which can accelerate the sort of normative shifts that we need in the law to become net zero aligned. Now, from my perspective, my greatest interest is legal systems change as a whole, and I'm acutely aware that that can't be achieved through strategic litigation alone. In fact, it's through commercial law and commercial lawyers that we really need to see the hundreds of thousands of lawyers globally working in their practices and making their practices zero aligned. So from my perspective, every one of you play a critical role in the transition, and the steps to take really are those which I think the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance set out so well. Informing yourselves of the science, making sure you're up to date with those, and then learning with your peers and listening to how we need to accelerate clients' net zero ambitions to become credible and robust. We need to see emissions being reduced in the next 5 years, not the next 30 years.
So we need to shift systems, and thanks so much, Alice. And the key systems, right, that everybody knows so well now, the energy system, the infrastructure system, the industry, and the land use systems. We need to shift those systems from their current high carbon emitting structures, architectures, to net zero, and transitioning through lowering the carbon as much as possible, as quickly as possible. And the science tells us we have to do that. That's not for discussion. The science tells us we have to do that. And one of the greatest challenges that investors in the financial sector are facing at the minute is, okay, we understand what you want us to invest in, but it's not there. It's not there in terms of investable opportunities. Build it, and we'll invest in it, but we need to get that architecture moving. So a whole number of dimensions come into that in relation to sort of commercial investment law type activities. And our speakers that we have today are four very, very experienced individuals. And I don't say very, very experienced to call any of them old, but they are experienced well beyond their years, speakers who have very much lived in this world of private international law, international commercial investment law, what we sometimes call as lex mercatoria, mercantile law, the law that exists where the money moves and the business flows. I call it the investment kind of like fisheries. It knows no boundaries. It's very much international. And the first of our speakers is David Hunter from Bates Wells. And one of the reasons we've got David Hunter here to speak to, he's a phenomenal lawyer, incredibly experienced, very much lives and breathes this world. But he also has taken a courageous decision to practice law a little bit differently. So although the focus of the panel was very much on the types of services that clients need to create these investable opportunities, we also want you to think about the types of decisions that lawyers make and how they practice the business of law. So David and Bates Wells have made some really interesting and exciting and courageous decisions, and I think events as they're evolving are vindicating those decisions. And so after we hear from David, we're going to turn to Richard Power, who's at Clyde & Co. and is a person who is a bit tired of hearing from me because I'm such an enormous fan of Richard. I pull him into everything. And what I think is so magical about Richard is his almost evangelical embracing of technology. And so many of the substantive solutions we need are built in technology, but also the way we do business in a lower carbon impact way comes from technology. So Richard's going to talk about some of the innovation and technology related innovation that his law firm is involved in, including with STEM universities. So there's some exciting stuff there. And then Richard's going to be followed by Lewis Mcdonald, who I haven't known as long as I've known Richard, but he's also now my speed dial. Never a good place to be, they're learning. But Lewis is at the front line. He's at the pointy end of this stuff. Lewis is doing these deals, building the deals, the project finance, the structured finance. He is making the stuff that needs to be invested in, he's making it investable. And that to me is so unbelievably exciting. And he's going to tell you about how to make more stuff investable. And I don't mean to trivialize how critical that is because it's everything. And then we've got Anna Marie Slot, who also new to my speed dial, but very much there, who's a finance partner at Ashurst. And Anna Marie is going to talk to us about how you wrap finance around those projects that Lewis is making investable. So what does the finance sector need to do to wrap around and securitize and create more padding around those projects so that they work, right? So that they're lasting, so that we get the investment in the right direction. And then Annette Magnussen, who I've probably known longest on this panel and spent more time with than anyone, is another of my heroes. Annette was the Secretary General for the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce Court of Arbitration for a long time. And she has, like David, so we're bookending the panel, as you can see, with two people who've taken particularly courageous steps in their own careers. like David, stepped out of the law firm model, and she's launched her own law firm called Climate Council, and it's exactly what it says on the tin. And it's a really exciting enterprise, and they're hiring. They just announced a new hire, so it's growing probably quicker than Annette ever expected or wanted. But she's doing some really exciting work, including in relation to the role of international dispute resolution. So the deals that Lewis is building, that Richard's innovating, that Lewis is building, that Anna Marie is wrapping up with finance, have to be, any disputes coming under them have to be resolved somewhere, and it's usually international arbitration. So what does international arbitration under the New York Convention do? What does international arbitration under treaties do that either interferes with, obstructs, or potentially provides glide rails to the reallocation of capital into low carbon activity? So no more from me. David Hunter from Bates Wells, can we start with you, and you can tell us how it's done?
Thanks very much, Wendy. Hope we can live up to that. I'm going to use my 8 minutes to talk a little bit about Bates Wells, who are I suppose we regard ourselves as a values-led commercial law firm. We're relatively small. We're about 250 employees, about 30 million turnover, but still a reasonable size. We're full service, so we can offer all manner of different legal disciplines to clients, but the majority of our clients are, to a greater or lesser extent, interested in public benefit and or social impact. When we were founded by a young commercial lawyer about 50 years ago, when a friend of his asked him to set up a charity for him, then the world was fairly binary. You were either a company and you were for profit, or you were a charity and you were sort of purpose driven. And since then, Bates Wells have played a pretty prominent role in trying to bring these motivations together. We've been involved in the development of the social enterprise sphere, particularly creating a legal form, the community interest company, which is generally the go-to form for social enterprises these days. Been involved in putting in place a lot of the infrastructure around social investment and what's involved in enabling investors to look for both a financial and a social return. And in the way that the firm's conducted itself, I guess it's adopted some social enterprise principles in that we've had an element of cross-subsidy of the fees we're charging our commercial clients, enabling us to work with some of the more purpose-driven clients and giving them the same sort of level of service for rates they can afford. 7 years ago, we were asked to help establish a new charity called B Lab that was bringing the B Corp movement to the UK. B Corps, if you've not come across them before, are businesses committed to making profit while delivering purpose. And a B Corp certification is a bit like a fair trade certification. So it gives people a bit of confidence that there's an independent assurance that B Corps are behaving in the manner that they profess to. But I guess characteristically for Bates Wells, rather than simply providing sort of legal advisory services at arm's length, going through that process, they too decided that they were going to become a B Corp, and in 2015 became the first UK law firm to attain B Corp status. That was particularly interesting because it meant changing the governance arrangements of the firm, changing the partnership deed so that it was amended to say that the firm would, its purpose was to have a material positive impact on society and the environment taken as a whole, which probably made a few of the partners gulp when they realized what that was about, and was impacting directly on the goal of optimizing profits per equity partner. But they took it and also signed up, as all B Corps do, to a sort of 3-yearly independent verification to make sure that we are doing what we're supposed to be. And now we're one of 4,000 B Corps globally who are committed to behaving in that way. 2 years ago, as the IPCC was telling us that if we carry on emitting carbon at the rates we were, we'd only have 12 years left of our carbon budget, and XR took to the streets and the school strikes took off. we started asking ourselves, okay, well, what, as an organisation that exists for positive impact, what is an appropriate response for us to make? And after a sort of firm-wide conversation, we formally acknowledged the climate emergency and identified 6 commitments that we would adhere to. I've not got time to talk about all of those, but I just want to touch on a couple. One was using law as a tool for good, going to Alice's point about trying to identify systemic interventions that we could make with our clients. So among those, we've been pushing the Attorney General for a ruling on what's an appropriate way for charities to invest as public benefit organisations their funds, and making sure that they're not being invested in investments which are actually going to cause harm to the public, and trying to get a definitive ruling on that, and also working with the Better Business Act campaign to ensure that businesses do have a very clear purpose, which involves all businesses by default have a purpose which involves trying to take social and environmental impact into account and not cause any material harm in doing so. Another one of our commitments is around collaboration, which is why it's so great to have things like the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance around, so it's easy to collaborate with other law firms. We're going to achieve much more impact by working together rather than just trying to do everything in isolation. And one of the additional benefits of that is requiring a different outlook. So we just found ourselves, we have to get out of that mentality of trying to see everything as a competitive advantage and shield what we do from other firms, but sharing our experiences, learning from one another, both in terms of what works and what doesn't, and encouraging one another to do better and others perhaps to join in with us. And coming out of that, thinking about the importance of doing things differently. So bringing that forward into where we are now. Clearly, we're in a space where things are changing probably more quicker than we're evolved to ourselves. Definitely requiring thinking about things differently, thinking about having different relationships between lawyers and clients, and how we can reevaluate all of that and our relationships with lawyers and society and lawyers and other lawyers, and how we need to do it at the appropriate scale, avoiding predatory delay. As Bill McKibben says, winning slowly is just another way of losing. So I guess I just end by emphasising the sort of opportunity of the situation we're in. We very much see not only this thing about business needing to step up and be responsible. Well, law firms are businesses, and we all need to do that. We're in a fantastic position in order to be able to be where actually we can have a massive positive impact if we do step up in that way, and it's our good fortune to be able to do that. But we do need to take it. Paul Polman talks about the net positive company and asks the question, is the world better off for your business being in it? And I think that's the question that we need to be asking ourselves as law firms and our clients as well. And I'll leave it there.
Can I just say, I think the lawyers of England and Wales Law Society are better off for having you in it, David. The Law Society resolution was, of course, published yesterday on climate change, and I know how hard you pushed for that, and how hard and for how many years you worked to get that to what was published today. So on behalf of lawyers across, well, I'm not a member of the Law Society anymore, am I? So we'll start in the Bar Council next.
David, I really enjoy listening to that. I think your work is just incredible. You said there were 4,000 B Corps globally. How many are law firms in that 4,000? Or is it just you? And how would you persuade others to join you?
Well, I think there's 2 in the UK at the moment. I think Mcdonald have also been certified, and I think there's 3 or 4 going through the process. So it's beginning to scale up. I believe there's somewhere between 12 and 20 globally. So it's still early. I think there is this thing about sort of, law firms somehow think they're sort of one step removed from being other businesses. And I mean, obviously in some respects we are different. We do have different sort of regulatory things that we have to observe, but at the same time, we can't just simply say that sort of removes any responsibility for the impacts of the advice we're giving. So I think that that is going to be changing. The first thing we're going to do, having got this resolution in place, is turn to that question of, okay, well, how do we actually have that wider impact? Because as businesses that largely sit in offices and don't generate much direct emissions, it'd be very easy to sort of say, oh, we're doing all we can. And we clearly can do more, and we must.
Richard, thank you so much, David, and for the question and Alice as well. Richard, what can lawyers do? What are lawyers doing in the partnership, that all-important partnership between technology and the law?
Thanks, Wendy, and hello, everybody. Well, just looking at what role commercial lawyers can play, they probably don't have the most obvious role in achieving net zero. But as we've already heard from David, we do have an important part to play. Industry and commerce produce much of the greenhouse gases causing global warming. So if our role as commercial lawyers is to be the grease which makes the wheels of commerce run smoothly, it's part of that role to help our clients operate in a more sustainable manner. Now, legislation, regulation, and precedents can be an important stick driving change in the commercial world, but they're blunt instruments, and they often achieve specific but limited changes in behaviour. History shows that the carrot to that stick of successful and profitable commercial relations can be even more effective in changing behaviour, because businesses are more eager to embrace change if it can be done profitably and without disproportionate risk. And that's where we commercial lawyers come in. To assist our clients in achieving the scale of change necessary to achieve net zero by 2050 or much sooner, as we have to, we as commercial lawyers have to innovate. And by innovate, I mean we need to do different things and do things differently. So, for example, the projects to develop the new technologies to produce clean energies, to power fleets of electric and hydrogen vehicles, and capture, use and store carbon emissions require huge investment, which is going to be talked about later on. To encourage this, structured finance and insurance lawyers need to find new ways to mitigate risk in those projects. Similarly, trade and tax lawyers need to structure deals to benefit from favourable carbon pricing mechanisms, investment protection and trade tariffs. Construction and planning lawyers need to help the massive infrastructure projects need to transform energy production and use to get from conception to reality quickly and with minimum risk. And intellectual property lawyers must help to protect the value of innovation in the new technologies required to tackle climate change so as to encourage investment. But at the same time, they must ensure that this doesn't prevent widespread adoption of this new technology to tackle global climate change. So an example of the sort of innovation which is needed is the work which my firm Clyde & Co has been doing on smart contracts through its Clyde Code arm. Smart contracts are fully automated, self-executing contracts, usually based upon blockchain or some other form of distributed ledger technology. They enable automatic performance of contractual obligations, so usually the instant payment of a sum of money upon the occurrence of a specified event set out in the governing algorithm and contractual terms. So Clyde Code brings together commercial lawyers and IT specialists to advise on and create smart contracts to meet clients' businesses needs. The team of software specialists provides programming and other technological advice on the code underlying the smart contract, and Clyde Code's lawyers advise on the legal structure governing the smart contract, as well as on intellectual property and data protection issues and dispute resolution. So how does this help in achieving net zero? Well, as I've said, one of the crucial factors in attracting investments to clean energy projects is reducing risk. Clyde Code has developed a parametric smart insurance contract which covers the insurance of solar energy production against the risk of a shortfall in expected energy generation due to bad weather. So solar power purchase agreements can impose a financial penalty if the amount of energy which is generated over a certain period drops below a certain level. and that would trigger a contractual penalty. So you can de-risk this issue by obtaining insurance against a lack of sunshine for the relevant solar farm. But monitoring sunlight levels and electricity generation, compiling the data and submitting a claim can take time, with payment for a successful claim taking even longer. In the Clyde Code developed smart contract, sensors monitor the sunlight experienced and the power generated at a solar farm and use algorithms to automatically compare the information to the service levels in the relevant power purchase agreement. As soon as the levels are reached which would trigger the contractual penalty, the smart contract automatically authorizes a claim and immediate settlement payment is made to the power producer's bank account. Now, this innovative multi-service arrangement could also assist the development of mini and microgrids. These are decentralized energy networks in which households and businesses produce and sell to each other relatively small quantities of renewable electricity produced from rooftop solar panels and small-scale battery storage such as family electric vehicles. Microgrids are central to the energy transition, which is critical for net zero, because renewable power is intermittent. When the wind blows and the sun shines, we've got loads of renewable power, but that causes bottlenecks in centralized distribution infrastructure. When it gets dark and the wind drops, we don't have enough renewable power. Decentralized grids bypass infrastructure capacity choke points by enabling neighbors to buy and sell each other's electricity and transform parked electric vehicles into storage facilities for renewably produced electricity. Aggregated local energy sources can even sell stored electricity back into the national grid to help with balancing, which addresses intermittency issues. Smart contracts are so important to microgrids because the participants, the so-called prosumers, producer-consumers, don't have the capability, the time, or perhaps the inclination to monitor numerous small-scale sales of electricity to one another. Distributed ledgers and smart contracts enable the automatic tracking of supplies of energy from one prosumer to another, with payments being made automatically to the relevant bank accounts without the need for prosumer involvement. But still further innovation is required. Existing power supply contracts, which are premised on a national grid corporate supplier to consumer relationship, where pricing is determined by reference to energy generated or consumed, needs to change to accommodate peer-to-peer and peer-to-grid trading, rewarding flexibility and balancing. Moreover, disputes will likely involve small sums of money, which would be disproportionately costly to litigate, and so innovative dispute resolution solutions are required. Those are just a few examples of how commercial lawyers can innovate to assist combating climate change and the path to net zero. So I'm going to hand back to Wendy and Alice now, so my fellow panelists can give you a deeper insight.
That is brilliant. Thank you, Richard. And I hope my fellow geeks listening are as excited by that as I am. I just find that so, so real and thrilling. And thank you, Richard. And speaking of real and thrilling, with Liverpool Street right up there behind him, we're turning to Lewis, who is going from the prosumer individual smart contracts, scaling it right on up, and hopefully with a bit of focus on emerging markets as well. But Lewis, what's going on out there? What's real and what's possible for lawyers to do or not?
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks, Richard. That was really interesting. I'd say I agreed with what you said there. Yeah, look, just to position myself here, I'm obviously Australian, as you might be able to hear from my accent. I started my career there over 20 years ago, working in the energy industry after doing degrees in environmental science and the law. So I'm quite a geek myself and pride myself on that geekery. I worked in Western Australia for a number of years, sort of training up in this area, and then moved to London about 17 years ago, 2004, to take a job with Herbert Smith, as it then was. Spent about 4 years in London doing all sorts of things in the sector, including actually spending a bit of time at BP and working on their very first carbon capture and storage projects, which they called Decarbonised Fuels 1. That led to DF2, DF3, DF4, etc. back in 2005, if you can believe it. So 16 years ago, they started looking at that stuff. After a number of years in London, I spent some time in Hong Kong, came back to London. Then I went out to Singapore and worked in the Southeast Asian energy markets for a number of years, building up a practice out there, working across emerging markets like Indonesia and Thailand and Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, etc. After that, I went to Korea and actually built up our office there, spent 4 years in Seoul, really developing a new legal market there as one of the first lawyers on the ground under the EU Korea FTA. After that, I had a role across our Asia practice and then spent a couple of years in Japan before coming back to London to lead up our energy practice globally, which is the job I have today. Alongside that role, I have a very active practice myself, which actually crosses over all the different energy subsectors and technologies. So having had a background in hydrocarbons, I now spend a huge amount of my time with renewables and a lot of time with gas and all sorts of different technologies. And I know a lot of people have different views on those things. Some think some are good, some think some are bad, some just think energy is a good thing in its own right. I mean, what do commercial lawyers do in this area? Well, I suppose as the energy sector group at Herbert Smith Freehills, we see our vision as being to energise the world, lead the transition and support the change. You know, a number of 3-word slogans in there. You might see some inspiration from recent events, but basically there's a lot of people in the world that don't actually have energy at all. I mean, in our Western countries, we're often thinking about how we can make our fantastic energy system cleaner, but for many, it's actually about having energy in the first place. So we play a big role in making that happen for many of the countries around the world. You know, there's over 800 million people who don't have energy. Lead the transition. You know, we spend a lot of time with clients helping them understand not just where the laws are today, but where are they going. Environmental laws and laws that support the energy industry, they have an incredible ability to spread around the world. Everyone has the same challenge at the end of the day. They need energy. Without energy, you don't have anything. You don't have a telecommunication system. You don't have much at all. So you need energy in one form or another. Ideally, it's affordable and it's reliable and ultimately clean. So we're trying to help to lead the transition in the various markets, whether it's from really no reliable energy to some reliable energy, or from coal to gas, or from what we have in Europe to a net zero system. That's pretty exciting. Support the change really means that this is really hard. It's really hard to go from what we have to what we need all over the world. People need support. Our lawyers need support. So our people and then our clients need support, and so does everybody else. So we try to do that. So we help clients understand where the law is today, but we try to help them know where it's going based on experience in different markets so that they can get ahead of the market and do well in the business they're trying to operate. There's plenty of examples of that, but I'll move on because I want to get to the next bit, which is what's the really exciting thing at the moment, and that's helping clients create investable projects that take the technologies further on. So, for example, over the last 15 plus years, there's been an enormous amount of investment in renewables, particularly wind and solar. You all know that, and some people think maybe we just switched to that completely. Well, those projects are continuing at a real pace. There's no shortage of demand for those types of projects. In fact, the shortage is the projects themselves and creating them and then making them work in a way with the system where we don't have too much intermittency, which leads us to investments in batteries and clean baseload. You know, nuclear is becoming more popular. If you read the net zero strategy from the UK, you'll see that featured quite heavily, which maybe concerns some of you, but it does provide baseload without providing carbon dioxide, which are the main benefits of it. Very, very expensive, needs a huge amount of support. So we've been actively designing the mechanisms that actually make those projects happen, the RAB models, the CFD models, and things like that. These models came from things like Thames Tideway, which we also advised on and designed the RAB model for. Those models spread out from those types of projects into offshore wind and ultimately into carbon capture and storage, green hydrogen, blue hydrogen, and all these other wonderful technologies that will ultimately provide us with a complete net zero system as the electricity system itself expands to absorb our mobility system and our heating system and everything else. So the world's electrifying. It's pretty exciting stuff. To get there, we really do need to create these investable projects. The government plays an enormous role. The people provide the money. So ultimately the people have to go along the journey. They have to be satisfied. And there's an enormous amount of work ahead of all of us to help the people understand the necessity for all of this investment. Unfortunately, too much time is spent on the front page of newspapers with the energy system. We don't really want to be there. We want to be boring. We want to be somewhere stuffed in the business section or somewhere else. We don't really want to be on the front page, but that's where the system is at the moment. And we need to make it boring again and get off there. To get there, we need to make these technologies cheaper, and that comes through practice. In other words, we have to get on with it and really start moving some of these projects. So the net zero policy that we've seen come out from the UK last week, Australia just released one the last couple of days. These are good steps. They're worth reading. You only need to read the executive summary. You get the gist, but it's pretty much in there in terms of good steps forward. And ultimately, you know, we're just here to help, but I'll just leave you with the comment that it's really down to the quote from Elvis Presley, which is, it's a little less conversation and a little more action. And that's, I think, what we're looking for from our leaders at COP26 in the coming weeks. Wendy, I'll hand back to you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lewis, for that. And ending on the Elvis quote, for those of you who don't know, if you Google Lewis on YouTube, you will see his musical side as he got many of us sanely through COVID with some really fun tunes. Alice has a question for you, which won't come as a surprise, Lewis. So here it comes.
Okay.
Hi, Lewis. So very supportive of focus on investable projects and getting more renewables on the stream, 100%. I suppose I also obviously support energy and reliable, clean energy across the globe. It's the type of energy which we know is the problem. Emissions are set to rise based on current NDCs by 16% by 2030. And as we know, we have to be minus 45% to keep 1.5 alive. The International Energy Agency published a report in May saying that we don't need any new coal, oil, or gas infrastructure to stay with that 1.5 goal. So I suppose my question is, how, when you're engaging with your energy clients, how much are they grappling with these facts from International Energy Agency about the extent and the speed with which we need to shift from one source of energy to the other?
I would say it's the number one issue that they talk about in their boardrooms. It actually is an existential issue for many of these companies, and it's something that they have to deal with, and they want to deal with, you know, as much as possible. You know, that scenario is very interesting from the IEA because it marked a big shift for them. And effectively, they're saying that if we spend something like $5 trillion per year, then there's a scenario out there that doesn't involve additional investment in hydrocarbons. So that's quite a price tag. And I think they've thrown down the gauntlet for the world to say, look, you can get through this, but this is the sort of money you need to spend. It's one thing to spend the money, but you've got to have something to spend it on. And that's the key point here. There's plenty of money out there, but you've got to create the projects. To create the projects, you need to find the way to make them viable, make them profitable. If they're profitable, they will attract all the money that is out there. But that's the challenge. And it's the models that are needed. And this is where the commercial lawyers come in. I know there's a lot of students on the line probably thinking about what they want to do in the future. There's a massive amount of work for you all out there to actually apply your brain power to create these solutions that are needed to attract the money where it needs to go, which is into these large-scale, investable, baseload, clean energy projects. So there's 20 to 30 years worth of work out there for you all to help to do this. And it's pretty exciting stuff.
Thank you so much, Lewis. And you said, show us the money. Well, money lady, Anna Marie, show us the money. Where's it going to come from? How do we make it accelerate, amplify, work, multiply? Anna Marie, I think you're on mute. This is like Tantalus. She's keeping us hanging. Here it is.
Can you hear me now? Is that going any better?
Yes, we can.
You can. Okay, great. I was saying it was a little difficult to come after an Elvis quote, so thanks very much, Lewis, on that one. The money is a fascinating aspect, right, of the transformation. So if you think about the financial markets as a whole, There is, as Lewis said, quite a lot of money looking for investable projects. And there isn't, as well as the transformation of the energy markets and the funding of that, there is an entire transformation of the finance markets going on simultaneously, which is a support for this transformation that that everyone's now focused on to net zero. If you think about it, the latest release from GFMA says that we need $150 trillion between now and 2050 to transform the world's economic systems to be creating a resilient and sustainable market. And so that's really what we're talking about here, is how does the money that's in the system transform itself and start focusing in on sustainable investment. That's been happening at an incredible rate. The market sort of began in 2008 or so with World Bank, EIB putting out green bonds. What were the very earliest green bonds? In 2017, ICMA, the International Capital Markets Association, put out voluntary frameworks of how to do a green financing that people could consider a green bond. It's a voluntary framework. It continues to this day to be a voluntary framework that has had massive, massive success with double-digit growth in the green bond market year on year, and the expansion of a green bond market to a social bond market, a sustainable bond market, a green loans market, a sustainable loans market, and now all the way into what's called sustainability-linked financings, where companies are able, many more companies are able to access that transformation type finance, where previously the whole area was focused on, in particular, projects like Lewis was talking about, actual economic projects that are creating renewables, for example. That's what a classic green bond would do, or refinancing that renewable. And when you think about the role of finance, it is everywhere. There is not very many examples. There are not very many examples of companies that operate without finance. And there are very few examples of companies that have finance that couldn't operate without refinancing of that. And so the financial system really underpins this transformation of the physical asset base of our society, which is what we need to have happen for net zero to occur. And it's developing all of those products that create the component parts of the financial system, which will support the transition and the growth and the scale of the finance market. So it's not just those primary financings, but it's what do you do to support those primary financing? I mean, we talked at the beginning a bit about risk, de-risking things. The derivatives market is a massive aspect of de-risking transactions for companies across the globe. Whether that's an Indian wind farm that's operating, borrowing money in dollars and operating in rupees and not able, and having to offset that risk for themselves of what's going to happen to their currency, or whether it's an interest rate offset on a derivative side where someone is borrowing at a floating rate on a loan and then but wants to figure out certainty, and so they offset it with a derivative. Those components of the financial market all need to be working in the same direction to achieve sustainability. And so the development of what are called green derivatives, derivative products that where the underlying is something that has been deemed sustainable. And what you're seeing right now, which is a really fascinating thing, that's you're seeing this happen in the finance market at a lightning speed. I mean, you think about the fact that these products didn't exist before 2017 in the commercial world, right? That is not a long time for there to be a market that's now generating $1 trillion a year, and going, double digits every year and growing. But this whole market is evolving in a voluntary way, in a market-driven way, with frameworks that are based on transparency, they're based on disclosure, they're based on rigor of the market participants in saying what they mean and having companies say what they're doing, having that tested, having that diligenced, and having investors look at it, and a real triumvirate, I think, of the entire financial system focused on this question of net zero. There's a new group that Mark Carney's put together, which is the Glasgow group, focused of banks, asset managers, investors, all of the component parts of the financial market, focused on how do we deliver a sustainable future? How do we finance it? How do we know that it's sustainable? How do we know what we're calling sustainable is sustainable? What words are people using? I mean, everyone here is a lawyer or has a law background, so we're all focused on what words mean. And that is a huge part of what's happening right now in the finance market. Lewis talked about, you got 20 to 30 years of projects ahead of you. You've also got 20 to 30 years or more of finance for those projects and refinance of those projects, and looking at how those money flows can get to where that infrastructure investment needs to happen, where that energy investment needs to happen, and really innovating at scale, how we can find solutions and how we can get support for that money to move into a robust and transparent market where people can address things. If you're reading the papers at the moment, I'm sure you're reading about greenwashing, which is an expression that's used for people putting out certain types of claims around greenness or sustainability and then being tested on them or having those questioned in the market. I mean, that's a key aspect of how the financial system works and the roles that lawyers play in those deals as we're doing diligence, as people are talking to the companies, as the banks are talking to the companies, as the banks are talking within themselves about what certain words mean in the context of evolving regulatory frameworks. The EU's put out a taxonomy, which is sort of the first language of words around what is a sustainable type of activity and what is how do you make sure that you haven't called something a green bond when you've built a brand new BREEAM accredited building on the last piece of swampland that sustains the only species of bird in the region, right? That you can't call a green bond if the harm that's caused by putting the building up outweighs the idea of what you put the building up for. So I think right now it really is a fascinating time to see how the markets are responding to the challenges of net zero and how all the market participants are really super focused. I mean, we talk with our clients every day, be they companies, be they banks, be they asset managers. This is on the top of their list to address what they're doing about net zero, how their investments are working, what those investments actually really stand for. Are they 20% sustainable, 40% sustainable, 60% sustainable? And how do you get to that data to figure out whether or not that's the case? And then how do you bring all of that together so that that robustness and transparency fuels even more growth in the market? I think I'm at my end, although I could go on for a while, but I think Annette probably has a fascinating bit to add here as well.
I could listen to you all night, Anna Maria. Anna Maria. I'm just wondering, isn't sustainable a bit like pregnancy? It's kind of an absolute. Can you be 40% sustainable? I'm not sure. That interesting thought. So what you were talking about there, and it's absolutely brilliant, is the de-risking through the structured finance, through the derivative, through the financial products. It's the securitization of the investment, and the finance lawyers among you or those studying it will understand that as securitization. But I want you just to stretch the imagination a little bit as you listen to Annette, because there is a case for investor protection under bilateral and multilateral investment treaties as also being a form of securitization. That's what these treaties were, what the purpose that they originated from. And they get a lot of, there's been a huge backlash about investment protection and ISDS, and particularly in emerging markets. So Annette, give us a bit of a update on what role we think investment arbitration might play to benefit decarbonisation or obstruct it, or both?
Thank you, Wendy, and hello everyone, good evening. You are right that there are lots of different views on investment arbitration, investor-state arbitration, and the value of investment protection treaties. And I would just, as of a background going into this discussion, just sort of mention my background at the Arbitration Institute here at the Stockholm Chamber of Commerce, my previous role. And I think in that role, I probably saw about 2,000 disputes or so. And I think, and of course, ranging between large disputes, between large corporations or involving states, but also to SMEs. And I think if there's one common denominator for all of these disputes, is that in one way or the other, they represent a failure, right? So you do not want to end up in the dispute. You want to do all these other exciting forward-looking things that we have heard about, invest for the transition and plan the financing and so forth. But we do know that sometimes you end up in a dispute. So I think what we could do this with this failure, we could try to learn from the failure and see how what can we learn for the future in this context. And there, one element of that is sort of digging deeper and look at the underlying instrument. And of course, for the investment arbitration cases, that is the investment protection treaty. And for those joining here tonight who may not be very familiar with the investment protection treaty, what that is really a treaty between states, but it gives rights to investors. And you could say it gives certain guarantees to investors on how they will be treated by the state to safeguard the investment and to instill confidence to make the investment. So that's the idea, as Wendy mentioned. And in these treaties, typically you will find provisions which enables the investor to file a claim against the state if they find, or if they have the opinion that these guarantees, if you want to call them that, were not met, the guarantees contained in the treaty. So that's sort of the investment protection treaties and dispute resolution under these treaties in a nutshell. And we have about 3,000 of these treaties out there in the world. But I think the treaty that's maybe of most interest to really dig into, and they dig into sort of the disputes that have been decided, is the multilateral treaty relating specifically to energy, because as this hour has showed you, the energy investments are really, really crucial for what we have ahead and what we have for the next 30 years or so. And the Energy Charter Treaty is a treaty that was designed in 1994, and it's a multilateral treaty, and it's held by many as really the most important multilateral investment agreement that governs cross-border investments in energy. And again, energy investments are really at the forefront of what we need to do to reduce emissions going forward. So it's truly interesting to study the treaty and the language of the treaty and the case law that has developed under this treaty. And there's a broad spectrum of views on how the ECT fits into the context of, for example, the Paris Agreement and the clean energy transition. And I think this is what you were alluding to, Wendy. And of course, this debate is bigger than the ECT, but there are clearly a very strong debate going on specifically on the ECT. So on the one end of the spectrum, it is voiced the opinion that this current version of the Energy Charter Treaty that we're now having really supports the energy transition because it encourages and it protects investments, including the investments in renewable energy. And it holds states accountable for regulatory changes, including when those changes affect the energy transition. Now, the other side of the spectrum in this discussion is it is held that in fact, the Energy Charter Treaty hinders the transition. And this is partly because the ECT is technology neutral. So there is no difference, the energy source, they're equally protected under the treaty. So because of this, at this end of the spectrum, it is proclaimed, or it's said that by protecting fossil fuel investments, and if damages are being paid out, that these are tax money being paid to compensate fossil investors. This is an illustration how the ECT hinders the energy transition. So therefore, there are arguments being held that the only solution to this is really to abandon the ECT, while others say that we could work with the ECT and we could reform the language of the treaty. So that's sort of where we are right now when it comes to the Energy Charter Treaty as an illustration of how the investment protection agreements could be differently interpreted, I would perhaps call it, in the point in time where we are right now. Because in parallel, of course, to this discussion on investor state arbitration, the clock is ticking, and we are sort of running out of time. And I think that's something we every day need to be aware of. And of course, I don't have to remind anyone on this call or in this conference about this fact, but it is something that perhaps we just need to have repeated. So against that background, we have an instrument like the ECT, for example, and the clock is ticking. I think one should ask oneself the question, and I think we have heard many examples of that previously already on this panel, how can we work with what we have? And are we really using the current legal frameworks to its fullest potential? Because as already you have heard, also it's really important that we have long-term and stable and transparent policies, and also that the investment cycles for 2050, they start now. And the IEA report was referred to earlier from May this year. And in this report, the IEA also predicts that almost half of the reductions that we need for 2050 targets, they are expected to come from technologies that are currently at the demonstration or prototype phase. So again, the investments keep coming so we can meet these targets. And also the IEA pointed out that reducing risk for investors will be essential to ensure the successful and affordable clean energy transition. So in summary, one could say that we are in a situation where we need a major shift in the energy systems around the world. And most importantly here, of course, moving away from coal, oil and gas to renewable energy sources. We need to nurture this shift by supportive and policy and regulatory environments. And we have certain international legal frameworks in place, the international investment agreements, but there are divergent views on their capacity to play a supportive role in this transition. So there's uncertainty how application of these treaties will really play out in the transition. Then when we set up the Climate Change Council earlier this year, this was a kind of question or equation, I could even call it, that we wanted to focus on. We wanted to look at how we can use the existing law as an accelerator for climate change action, or figure out if it need be adjusted, how should that happen? Again, so that piece of legislation could actually work as an accelerator. And against that background, we're doing now actually a project, which of course Wendy is very familiar with Net Zero Lawyer Alliance, where we look at the ECT specifically and look at the case law to find out if this treaty is used to its fullest potential, and really to address what I just mentioned before, work with what we have. And there are some observations that we have made in the course of this project that are quite interesting. For example, when we put the Energy Charter Treaty and the Paris Agreement next to one another. And it relates to the climate change perspective. Is it there, isn't it? Well, actually, it's actually quite absent. Is the treaty language used to its full potential when it comes to bringing in public international law? Well, there could be indications that there is more to be done there. And what could investors legitimately expect on regulatory stability in light of the global climate crisis? Again, there is an interesting analysis to be done there and some interesting discussions. So I do think that one of these parameters that we have been talking about this hour on the climate law in practice, in private practice, is really, and then we have heard this from several speakers already, how we use the existing law as an efficient tool for change. Or how we use existing law with slight innovations. I think that could be applied on many different levels in many different buckets. And at times, this means that we as lawyers, or you listening, watching this, need to be the very first lawyer to apply or argue an existing legal instrument in a new way. And when that happens, or when you find yourself in that situation, I think you should welcome it. And I think this should be encouraged.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Annette. There are so many questions, and we're up against time. But given the student body, I think there is one question that I want to hear the answer to. In light of the Law Society's resolution, and we'll start with you, David, in light of the Law Society's resolution, including its stated intention to look at the ethical rules, we know that rules 3.2 and 3.4 of the Solicitors Code of Conduct here in the UK, or in England and Wales, not here in Scotland, provide for competent legal services. Against that requirement, and I'm going to ask each of you, what if anything, are your law firms doing in terms of recruitment to try to ensure that you're getting that climate change competency in with your new recruits? Are you hiring for it? Are you looking for it in your hiring process? Starting with David.
Yeah, we are. I mean, realize I've gone so dark. Sorry about that. I mean, the way we recruit tends to be through a process of engaging with people long before the interview, and so we have conversations with them, you know, when they're coming to work experience and events at the firm anyway. So the conversation has tended to have already started. What's interesting actually is, again, I suppose because of how we've positioned a lot of, that's partly what's attracted a lot of them to us in the first place. What's interesting, I guess, actually, is sometimes they are more informed in a broader sense in terms of issues around climate and biodiversity than perhaps some of our experienced members of staff are. So actually, you know, we may need to, and we are working with our colleagues on, you know, educating in the wider sense in terms of the implications of some of the climate emergency and the biodiversity crisis. And again, it's been encouraging to take upon that, but yeah, it's not something that's just for new entrants. It's we could all learn and possibly learn from some of our younger colleagues as well.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a demonstration of precisely the humility that we all need to demonstrate despite our years of experience. Richard, what's Clyde & Co doing on the hiring front?
Nothing much different, actually, Wendy, because we've always looked for the most intelligent, enthusiastic, commercial and driven people who want to be entrepreneurial and innovative. And I haven't met one candidate who would fulfill those criteria who isn't already interested in, well read up on, and focused on climate change and wanting to address it. So I think it's just a question of going out and embracing that. And I have to say, and I'm sure all the other panelists will say, the people who are the most enthusiastic, most driven about climate change are the trainees, the people we've picked up as graduate recruits. And it's inspirational for those of us with thinning greying hair.
It's great. Lewis, what's a dirty on getting into Herbert Smith as the sun sets on Liverpool Street Station?
Yeah, if you want to enjoy these views. Look, I think that I agree with Richard there as well, and David, that the younger lawyers coming through, they tend to be very well versed in this area. They come to us with a lot of passion and a lot of enthusiasm, you know, to get involved. They often want to come to us because they get to work on big renewables projects and various things. So they often have their views, if you like, on what needs to be done. And we engage in lots of debate and discussion with them about all of that. Ultimately, we're trying to turn the lawyers that come to us into just fantastic lawyers. You know, if you really want to be helpful in this area, first and foremost, you've got to be a very good lawyer. You know, if you want to get involved and help and bring forward these very complicated projects in emerging markets or in OECD countries, you've got to be really good at what you do. So whilst you can have all the enthusiasm you like for climate change, if you want to really help, you've got to really spend some time learning the craft and being an excellent lawyer. And so you've got to do those two things at the same time. We think we offer that. And if you've got the passion, the enthusiasm, the commitment and the grades, then, you know, we'll take a look.
Anna Marie, speaking of fantastic lawyers, what's Ashurst doing in their recruitment process, apart from offering coffee at COP at Glasgow, for which we're truly grateful?
We are. Look, we went a few years back and kind of overhauled our whole recruitment process through the lens of, you know, social mobility and diversity. And so we've actually kind of altered a lot of how we do our intake in terms of what we look at, you know, the roles that people are doing to try to come to a data-led solution of, you know, what makes really great lawyers. And we've had fantastic success in bringing on people, as, you know, as everybody else has said, you know, David and Richard and Lewis, the trainees coming in are already up to speed on a lot of these things. And people in our systems have actively like gone out and gotten extra degrees around different things, sustainable finance degrees from Cambridge and various other degrees. And then we've also taken we just finished our first inaugural internal conference on COP Academy, what we're calling COP Academy, which is really to upskill all of our lawyers across the globe on the phraseology, the terms, why clients care, why we care, what we're doing. So it's a matter of bringing in the people who are already enthusiastic and then identifying all the people already in the system who are massively enthusiastic and focused. And it's been fascinating because it really is it's an area where people that wouldn't have necessarily gotten to work together have been really a fantastic collaboration across groups because they're interested in a net zero outcome. And so that's been a real driver for us.
So exciting to hear. Annette, climate consult, it's all in, climate council, it's all in the name really, isn't it?
You are right. You could say it in the name because obviously, but I think that does not make us unique in this crowd, that you look for the passion in the mission, so to speak, in addition to being very skilled in what you do and bringing experience to the team. I mean, we are currently building the airplane as we're flying it. So it's really, having people join that could be co-pilots on this journey. And we have been very fortunate that we have had a large number of really, really talented and experienced people reach out to us. We can't take them in all immediately, but we will, we are building a big airplane. So keep your eyes open. But I think the passion is probably, in addition to be very skilled, I think, but again, I think we all share that.
Amazing. Fueled by green hydrogen, I hope. So we're out of time, we're over time, and you've kept time all day until you got to us, so I'm really sorry. There is much more. Look, there is so much more. These amazing, amazing practitioners are making themselves available to you all through an initiative that Freedom Kai is going to just tell you about. If you just want to hang on for an extra few minutes to learn how to get a whole lot more of these astonishing people. Freedom Kai, it's over to you. And apologies from Alice, who had to slip into another meeting.
Understandable. And actually, it's Marie-Claire, and it's literally just an announcement. But you're completely right that Freedom was cueing the slides, not me. So just to underline that when the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance was formed, they were invited by some amazing women who were organizing London Climate Action Week to put a panel together. And in the context of putting that panel together, they realized that lots of law students, really from around the world, but especially also from the University of Cambridge, University of Oxford, some of the other university law faculties, were desperately interested in practicing climate law and needed a better picture of how to find those law firms that don't expect you to leave your values at the door. And so actually wanting to make something happen on that score, a new Climate Law in Practice Fireside Chat series was being launched tonight. So together with everyone who is here, including Wendy Miles, we are very, very happy that this launch is taking place. You can skip to the next slide. We already have one per month. I actually booked practicing climate lawyer who is willing to sit down for an hour and a half, hopefully here in Cambridge or in Oxford by a fire, but barring that also online, and making it available to all of the students, not just here with us tonight, but also those who are watching at a later date and watching from different time zones. And as you can see, we've had some commitments from some of the lawyers on this entire panel, including Wendy herself in November, David in January, Richard as Miss February in the calendar, Anna Marie in March, Annette in April, and Michael Strauss from EBRD has been invited for May, as well as Douglas Lees from the Green Climate Fund as General Counsel for June. So over back to you, Wendy. I'm very, very happy together with everyone on this panel, and especially the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, to declare this new fireside chat launched.
And if anyone's wondering, the only reason Lewis isn't on there was because he had a client meeting during our prep call, so we weren't able to secure his consent.
July, Lewis, would you like to do July? It's either that or the 30th of December, which I'm not sure is fair to anyone, let alone our
I'll
students.
take July. There you go. Public commitment.
Amazing.
All right.
Amazing. That was not a setup, but it kind of was. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
I got shamed into it.
Yeah, yeah. We twisted your rubber arm.
Sorry, everyone, again, those are amazing questions. Can we please collect them up and we'll try and address them by email and things, and the panelists, if they have time, can address some of those really, really critical questions, because they're important, they're valuable. And I'm sorry we didn't get to them, but I could listen to these 4 or 5 people with Alice absolutely all night. You give me hope, folks. You give me hope that maybe we can turn this bus around. So keep at it, keep the faith, keep at it. And the students out there, come work with these fabulous people and help us try and get where we need to go.
Absolutely. So just to take us straight away to the next panel, I'm going to say thank you very, very much to Wendy, Lewis, Annette, everybody in the panel and in the Net Zero Lawyers Alliance, David, Richard, as well Alice, who had to slip away, and really deeply appreciated that chance to talk to some of the young lawyers, especially junior associates and others who are thinking about how they would want to be able to practice climate law. We're now moving into the very last section of today's part of this conference. And that is, of course, 2 incredible keynote speakers and then some very, very special announcements of the prizes that are being given for the conference. Tonight, we will have especially the prize for the best poster and the prize for the best video presentation, both of which should be available. And I'm hoping that the team would be able to post them into the chat of this meeting and also make them available to all of you via email that can come to you, everyone who has registered. But then we also have 2 incredible speakers who have been kind enough to join us from very different time zones. And rather than take too much more time now, I'm very, very pleased to welcome someone who needs no long, complicated introduction, particularly after the news from the United Nations that arrived just recently. And that is, of course, Dr. David Boyd, the United Nations Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment. He's a professor at the University of British Columbia, but he's also a tireless advocate for global recognition of the right to a clean and healthy environment. And David, you are joining us right now from a small island off the west coast of British Columbia, Canada, where it is early morning. And I recognize the books on your shelves, which actually says something rather sad about me, probably. So we're really, really happy to have you here with us. And please, can you just give us a little bit of an idea of what you've been up to, why it's important, and how can we celebrate with you?
Right. Well, delighted to be joining you, Marie-Claire, and thanks for the opportunity. You know, as everybody on this webinar knows, the latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change confirms that we are living in a climate emergency with increasingly frequent and intense extreme weather events, droughts, floods, and rising sea levels. But this global climate crisis is also very much a human rights crisis. The rights to life, health, food, water, cultural rights, the rights of the child, and of course, the right to a healthy environment are being jeopardized and violated on a daily basis. The adverse impacts fall disproportionately upon the shoulders of poor, vulnerable, and marginalized populations. And this crisis also undermines virtually all of the Sustainable Development Goals, turning them into a mirage that disappears as we approach 2030. As the UN Special Rapporteur, I did my first country mission to Fiji 2 years ago, and I went to a village called Vunidogoloa, which is one of the first communities in the world that had to be completely relocated because of rising sea levels, storm surges, saltwater contamination of their drinking water and their agricultural lands. And they moved inland by about 3 kilometers, which doesn't sound like a lot, but older persons, persons with disabilities, young children, pregnant women, they're now separated from the ocean that has sustained their culture for centuries. I also visited 2 informal settlements while I was in Fiji, on the outskirts of Suva, the capital. And most of the people I met there had actually lost their homes in a tropical cyclone Winston in 2016. They were living in very rough conditions, And both of those settlements were experiencing floods, again, exacerbated by climate change. The floods then caused waterborne diseases, and there was actually a typhoid fever outbreak in Fiji while I was there. And it is crystal clear that the people of Fiji bear almost no responsibility at all in causing the climate crisis. And yet there they are on the front lines, losing their homes, relocating and rebuilding their communities. This is really a human rights crisis and a climate injustice. I've also on other UN missions met with pastoralists in Kenya whose livestock are starving because of drought. I met with indigenous Sami people in northern Norway whose cultural rights based on reindeer herding are in jeopardy because of warm and erratic winter weather. Now, back in 1992, governments negotiated the Framework Convention on Climate Change and pledged to prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the Earth's climate system. Obviously, this commitment has not been met. Burning of coal, natural gas, and oil has skyrocketed. Global emissions are up over 60% since 1992. And the reports published in the last few days make it clear that we are not on track to limit global warming to 1.5 or even 2 degrees, as promised in the Paris Agreement. And the Achilles heel of international environmental law is a lack of compliance and enforcement mechanisms, which results in a lack of accountability. And that's where human rights have such an important role to play. We know from the events of recent centuries that human rights can be catalysts for transformative changes in society. The abolitionists invoked freedom and equality in successfully ending slavery. Women, the civil rights movement, the anti-apartheid movement, indigenous peoples, persons with disabilities have all used human rights as catalysts for societal transformation. It's never instant, easy, and human rights are certainly not omnipotent, but history proves they can be powerful game changers. And that's why it is so exciting, as you said, Marie-Claire, in your introduction, that one of the most exciting developments in the recent history of human rights is the UN's recognition 3 weeks ago today of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. This is the first time this right has been recognized at the global level. And although the resolution is not legally binding, it will be a catalyst for more ambitious action throughout the world. And we can look back at the 2010 UN resolutions on the right to water and sanitation to see what kind of impacts these resolutions have. Countries like Costa Rica, Fiji, Mexico, Slovenia, Tunisia all amended their constitutions, their highest and strongest laws, to include the right to water. Other nations from France to Colombia included this right in legislation. And most importantly, many nations across the planet have accelerated efforts to fulfill this right. Mexico has extended safe drinking water to more than 1,000 rural communities in the past decade. Slovenia prioritizing safe drinking water for Roma communities living in informal settlements. And Canada, new partnerships between our federal government and indigenous communities has enabled more than 115 remote indigenous communities to gain access to safe drinking water. We also have decades of experience with the right to a healthy environment at the national level, showing that it is a catalyst for stronger environmental laws and policies, improved implementation and enforcement at higher levels of public participation, and most importantly, on the ground improvement in environmental quality. So countries have reduced air pollution more quickly, reduced greenhouse gas emissions more quickly, provided safe drinking water to a higher proportion of their populations. A couple of examples. Costa Rica in 1994 added the right to a healthy environment to their constitution. Since then, they have doubled forest cover from less than 25% to more than 50% of their land. And Costa Rica generates 99% of its electricity from wind, solar, geothermal, and hydroelectricity. In France, they added the right to a healthy environment to their constitution more recently in 2004. And that was a catalyst for the world's first national law banning fracking, and more recently, a law that will prohibit future oil and gas development in France and French territories. In Kenya, the right to a healthy environment was used to block an ill-conceived coal-fired power plant at Lamu on that country's east coast. So one of the strengths of a rights-based approach to climate change is that there are these institutions and processes that can provide accountability. We're witnessing explosive growth in rights-based climate litigation across the world, and lawsuits are alleging that governments are failing to fulfill their human rights obligations. And courts, this is the good news, is that courts are increasingly ordering governments to take more ambitious climate action, setting aside the approval of coal-fired power plants, pipelines and other fossil fuel infrastructure, ordering actions to stop deforestation. And early research indicates that cases are more likely to succeed in states that recognize the right to a healthy environment. A few months ago, we had the Constitutional Court of Germany ordering the government to adopt more ambitious targets and accelerate the pace of climate action. And within weeks, the government had agreed to cut emissions 65% by 2030 and speed up the target for getting to net zero. In Colombia, 25 children and youth convinced the Supreme Court that their right to an environment was being violated by deforestation in the Amazon region. And the court ordered the government to sit down with those young plaintiffs and develop a plan to end deforestation. In Australia, a judge warned the government about the devastating impacts of further coal expansion on the rights of children. And this trend towards increased use of litigation will continue until governments fulfill both their environmental and their human rights commitments. So I know time is brief, so the bottom line is basically this, that we must put human rights at the heart of all climate action, mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage. This is an obligation, not an option. Rights-based approaches are also our best, and I would argue, our only pathway to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So that's my brief overview today. Thank you very much, and over to my good friend, Justice Antonio Benjamin from Brazil. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, David, and deeply, deeply appreciated. While you are both here, we'd like to make a special announcement in between one keynote and another. And it's partly because the person who is our head judge is actually, she's just informed me that she's had an emergency and won't be able to stay. And since obviously I'm conflicted out, there's no possible way that I can be involved in judging these amazing video conference presentations, which involve so many of the students I know. I'm going to turn over to her, Dr. Alexandra Harrington, to announce the winners of the poster competition. And then we're going to ask Justice Antonio Benjamin to follow up with a congratulations for the winners and also a closing speech for this evening. Alexandra?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mary Claire. And it is so much fun. I love being asked to do awards because everybody's happy. So this is lovely. But we had some truly amazing video and online presentations that were sent to us by those who couldn't attend in person or obviously online, but during the timing of the Zoom event. And out of those, we had very dedicated judges go through and review everything. And it is my distinct pleasure to announce that we have two winners. The first winner is Advocate Marcia Mutmena, I hope I did say that correctly, from the Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. And her presentation was on exploring the opportunities and challenges of rights-based climate litigation in Indonesia. So huge congratulations to you, wonderful work. Our second winner, coming to us from Kyoto University, is Kumi Hattori. And Kumi's presentation was on the limitations of the human rights approach to climate loss and damage. So we thank you all. We thank all of the winners and also all of the participants for providing your expertise and your guidance. We look forward to some other special announcements during the day tomorrow. But in the meantime, please join me in offering our heartfelt congratulations. And Freedom Kai is holding up the medals you will be receiving as winners. So please join me in
online ceremony to give the medals.
I do appreciate the modeling there, Freedom. I think that's a lovely way to do it. And
we're not quite in the Vanna White category, but thank you, Freedom Kai.
But very close. Vanna would be proud. And I believe that these presentations will also be available on the Climate Law and Governance Initiative website as well. So if you would like to see these two presentations, as well as all of the other truly commendable presentations, we would invite you to join our website and take a look at those. So thank you all for your perspectives.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Harrington, and congratulations to Kumi Hattori from Kyoto University and to Advocate Marcia Mutmena from the Indonesian Center for Environmental Law. We will have two other announcements of prizes, but not tonight. The first one is for those who have been the winners of the conference early career scholars presentations, whose abstracts were selected and who are still making their presentations tomorrow morning. So we will be finishing the judging and then selecting you. And then the other is the winners of the poster competition, which I understand we are just waiting for Lord Robert Carnwath and Emily Farnworth to be able to submit their final decisions. It sounds like they have a very, very tough choice because some amazing posters have been submitted. So we will hopefully see them tomorrow as well in the closing plenary. And without further ado, and to allow him to be the very first non-organizer to congratulate you, I would like to turn to our closing keynote speaker for this evening, who is very, very well known to us all. Not only is he a courageous and extremely well-spoken, articulate, and legally acute judge in Brazil, but he is, of course, also one of the founders of the Global Judicial Institute on the Environment, and has spent many years in service to our entire community as chair of the World Commission for Environmental Law of the IUCN. Judge Antonio Benjamin, it's wonderful to see you here this evening for us and this afternoon for you. Please.
Thank you. I'm sure this was a very long day. And then we have at the wrapping up session, Professor David Boyd, with his infinite optimism. He wrote a book, for those that are not aware of it, called, and correct me, David, The Optimistic Environmentalist, or something along those lines. And this shows that we if there is one requirement for someone to work with environmental law, is one that you believe that humanity can do good, and second, that you are an optimistic, because otherwise you won't be happy, you won't be successful doing environmental law. And I guess what we have here in this long day that was put together by the organizers, and of course Marie-Claire, ahead of this mosaic of people, institutions, but especially students, is something that is related to optimism. And beginning with the title of this event, let's not forget that 10 years ago, we were not talking about climate change law. And for environmental law itself to be accepted as something different from utopians and hippies or new age sort of legal minds, it took decades. And now we don't even try to explain it. We take it for granted. So I would like to begin with this so we don't miss what is going on among ourselves. And it's not even climate change law anymore. It's just climate law. So it means that we have incorporated climate as a new legal object, as we say in French or Portuguese or Spanish, bien juridique. So it's a legal thing, a new legal entity that is incorporated so fast in the vocabulary, but not at the outskirts of law, but as a central component of law. And I think this is absolutely interesting to explore. And at the same time, this puts climate change in somehow a different position from environmental law, because if environmental law came from the boundaries, from the outside, and climate law or climate change law just happens to be, and here we are. So let's not forget that with this popping up of climate law, we have lessons to take from this phenomenon. The first lesson, and I hope this guides our negotiators in Glasgow, is that there is no time to waste. So even we lawyers that discuss anything, everything, all the time, we are not or don't see the need to discuss whether we have a new legal discipline or not. We did this with labor law. We did this with human rights law. And incidentally, David wrote another wonderful book on the revolution. Imagine, he called it a revolution. Here, we don't even call it a revolution of climate law. We just happen to accept it. So what are the lessons that we can learn in addition to this that is urgent and it's so taken for granted that we don't need to have much discussion on climate law as such? The first point that I would like to emphasize is that it is a brand new legal discipline, but it's a legal discipline that is imperialist. And it's imperialist because it needs to influence all other legal disciplines. Even private law has to knee down, as we have just seen in the previous panel, before climate change. So there isn't a single legal discipline that will not be touched, from constitutional law all the way to criminal law, private law. There is not a single legal discipline that will not be touched by climate law. Second, or perhaps third, and I will stop. It is a legal discipline that does not intend to change just the inner vocabulary of law, but it intends to change everything that is related to law, and not just to environmental law, but to law. So it changed institutions. So new institutions are coming up. It changed the way we look at nature, because it's not just the nature that it's close to us. It's nature that's somewhere up there, but it could also be underground with new technologies and so on. It is something that will change the way we take cases into courts. And this is my last comment. And here, perhaps, David, climate law is similar to human rights law. It does have a strong component of human rights law, but it's not just human rights, as we have just seen in the previous panel. And I say this because human rights did change not just the legal regimes, but it had to change legal paradigms, and it had to change the way we judges see things, perceive things, and translate those things into judgments and decisions. So I think what's going to happen with climate change law is something similar, that as a judge, I can't discuss the specifics. I'm just guessing that we judges will not be able to decide climate change law cases using the same boxes that we have been using since the Hammurabi Code or the Justinianus, and say, well, it's just a new thing that we need to adjust. No, I think the transformation will also be within the judiciary, within the way we judges deal with those issues, everything from new legal objects to different rules of evidence, different remedies, and different judicial institutions. So congratulations again. I stop here, and this I am sure was a very productive day that started with two good friends, Robert Carnwath and Christina Voigt. And I am sure that we, with this ending, which is paying a tribute to those that participated, the awards, it is a good day. And we have reasons, Professor Boyd, to be optimistic here. Thank you.
Thank
Well,
you very much.
I see my colleague, Ayman Shirkawi, with a very nice library behind him. I prefer the Moroccan
Go ahead.
Background. Oh yeah, it's the library, it's the library. But I prefer when he has, you know, one of those wonderful Moroccan backgrounds. But so good to see you, Ayman, too.
I can show Ayman as well. Oh, my screen is unfortunately not not with the right background. But I think one of the things that has been perhaps most extraordinary about organizing this conference, and there you go. Now you're in the Lauderpacht Center for International Law in the University of Cambridge with Ayman at a correct social distance. Welcome to the extraordinary arrangements for Cambridge conferences in a time of COVID, and I would actually like to especially thank both Judge Antonio Benjamin, who I have now known for many years and who has received us in Brazil not once but 3 times in the Rio 2012 conference, in the Rio +5 conference with the president of the country, and in the 1992 Rio Earth Summit, as well as many other times as well. And he is still here. He is one of los imprescindibles, actually continuing to work for the change that we know is possible and necessary. So thank you for your service for so many years, Antonio, and thank you as always for inspiring us. And speaking from inspiring us, I should also say a very, very special thank you to David. I have been to the islands where he is currently, and they're among, of course, my favorite places on the planet. I was raised very close to where he is. And one does not have to look out of one's window to see orcas leaping in the ocean and giant cedar trees and rocky cliffs to know that the environment is important. All of us have a very, very close connection to the world around us. And to ignore that connection is actually also to ignore part of what makes us human. You have both reminded us of our humanity and of our larger responsibilities for the web of interconnected ecosystems that is life that we depend on. And for others, those who are weaker, those who are vulnerable, those who are actors in their own change, but are asking for companionship, solidarity, engagement, a chance to be able to shape the future they want. And both of you are very much people who have done that and have helped to do that and have been sincere and steady and here and making this change happen throughout the years. We had a panel earlier about what it means to practice climate law. And I think the two of you are also incredible examples for us all of exactly that and more. So thank you for both of you for joining us for this closing session for the first day of the conference. I would like to especially also thank the entire team that has been working tirelessly to make this possible through not just the 3 universities, but also around the world, really. Many of whom are going to be in the COP next week. And I would especially like to thank our rapporteurs and our moderators and our judges who have helped us with the very, very difficult task, which I stayed well away from since these are many of my own students, in terms of helping to judge the best presentations, the best posters, and the best videos of the conference. We are very much looking forward tomorrow. We will be starting at 9:30 British Standard Time with an extremely fascinating panel on exactly what is happening at COP26 with the negotiations that are helping to fill out the last few arrangements under the Paris Agreement. And more importantly, of course, the ambition and the collaboration and the partnerships that are needed to address global response to climate change. So we're greatly looking forward to that. We have had a wonderful, wonderful day. It has been a very intense one. This is a very intense area of law. I can only imagine that the people who worked on laws that advanced a place in society for half of the world's population, that would be women, and those who worked on the laws against slavery have had similar days and similar nights. And they succeeded, and they're still fighting, because that's what it means to succeed, is that you're still fighting. And we will be here as well, still fighting. So thank you very, very much to you both, and we will see you tomorrow.